So I wanted to start off by asking you about this big move that's coming up to Vietnam. I mean, it's huge. You've been at Yogaville for a while now, and the plan is to move to Vietnam in a few months for what, a year or so?
I'll be there for 2 years.
2 years.
One of my kids is a new American diplomat, and she's invited me to go with her. Actually, invited me and my wife. So this is pretty wonderful. Going to Vietnam for 2 years. Yeah.
So how are you feeling about that? Yeah.
Moderately terrified. Longest flight I've ever been on was 15 hours. This is 19 hours. And my body was only 25 years younger back then. I hear the 19-hour flight is quite a sensation. But other than that, I'm just thrilled.
Mm. Do you find yourself having expectations for what this experience, or trying to imagine, what is my life going to be like living in Vietnam for 2 years?
Well, I'll tell you this. It can't be much more of a shock for me than living in the South in the United States.
Mm.
I'm a New Yorker, a Chicagoan, a San Francisco guy, a Los Angeles resident, a London resident, a Paris resident, a Tel Aviv resident. Yogaville? 10 years ago, you told me that I was going to spend a decade in Central Virginia, where there's nothing remotely nearby except an interesting collection of cows, which I thought were large dogs when I got here. I would have said, you're nuts.
So do you find that, your experiences of the past, a few of them that you just mentioned, that they support you in what's coming into the future? They give you some confidence in regard to whatever you're going to face? Actually
undermine my confidence entirely. When I was invited to a local community meeting here in support of Yogaville's relationship with the surrounding community, I had my teeth gritted. We walked in, was the middle of the coldest part of the winter. There was snow and ice everywhere. Walked into the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. And I was expecting essentially a resurrection of the White Citizens Council. But that's because I was stuck in 1966 and it was 2014. Instead, what I saw were black and white business owners sitting side by side, having a great old time. So I owned the problem. I was the one who was stuck. That's why I said it was such a huge shock for me. The previous time that I was in Dixie, I was being beaten by the Ku Klux Klan while covering a night voter registration march in a hellhole called Grenada, Mississippi. I shouldn't say that.
Did you actually get beaten?
Oh, yeah.
By the KKK?
Yeah. Matter of fact, oh, yeah. Who would lie about a thing like that? Well, Donald Trump. No, was a very wonderful congressman from New York, George Santos. I'm not afflicted with that particular dilemma. No, as a matter of fact, the photograph of me being beaten was made by the same brilliant young Associated Press photographer who won the Pulitzer Prize that year for a photograph that he made, a series of photographs he made earlier that same year of civil rights figure James Meredith being shot by a psycho-racist named Aubrey James Marvell. But this isn't much of a yoga conversation. It's just why, for me, I swore that I was never going back to Dixie except to cover a story and made sure I got out in the next plane. So now I live here and I love it.
All right, so let's shift to yoga.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if you could share a bit about your relationship with yoga.
Integral yoga has become my life in so many ways. I arrived at the ashram almost 10 years ago, badly broken in body, mind, and spirit. And Yogaville said essentially, oh, yeah, another one. And in the space of about 6 months, the ashram shaved 100 pounds off my body, restored my physical, mental, and spiritual health, and opened my heart in ways that were, to me, almost unimaginable, at least at that time. And, got married here. Married a long-time integral yoga teacher who began teaching integral yoga in the 1970s. Much younger woman. She's 77. I'm about to be 80.
How did you choose to take the leap and come to Yogaville to begin with? I'm sure that wasn't an easy decision to make.
Oh, it was only barely rational. I had been told by my physicians that I was approaching death because of multiple maladies, including not getting more than 3 hours sleep a night for more than a year, which is pretty much the entry to organ breakdown. And I was sitting in front of my computer wondering what was going to happen to me for the rest of my life. if I was going to have a rest of my life. And I heard this sound in the back of my head, and I couldn't figure out what it was. It sounded like, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. And I thought, what in the world is it? Wait a minute. I last heard that when I was making that documentary film on yoga in 1973 in New York. Who was the subject of that? Swami Satchidananda. I wonder how he's doing. And of course, I typed his name into Google, and the great teacher had left his body, but he had built Yogaville, which he had told me at the time, back in 1973, was his dream. Built Yogaville somewhere probably in central Virginia. He had done it. I was in Washington, D.C. Yogaville was only 3 or 4 hours away. I called the Yogaville phone number, spoke with a wonderful young woman who kept saying to me, now, you know, sir, this is not a medical facility, because I was being very, very open with her as to what I was going through. She said, this is not medical, but we do have a lot of peace here. And we have a special. I can give you 5 days for the price of 3. That's exactly what she said. And I laughed. I said, I'll take 10. She said, we don't do that. Come for 5. See how it goes. We'll talk. About 6 years later, the wonderful Yogaville staffer who met my train that night at Charlottesville Amtrak took me aside and told me this story. He said he didn't have a very detailed description of the person he was to pick up at the Amtrak. And he wasn't sure who it would be until he saw this fat guy almost fall off the train onto the platform. He figured that must be my guy. It was me. And what he said was, while we were driving to the ashram, the hour or so from the train station, he was afraid that I might be the first person that he picked up at a bus terminal, an airport, or a train station who would be dead in his car before he could get him to the ashram. That's how bad it was. So naturally, I live in gratitude. I was given a whole life, which I didn't think I was going to have.
What do you think led to you being in that kind of shape to begin with?
I think probably like most people who have had full, exciting, wonderful careers, and whatever that might have been, mine was journalism and broadcast journalism especially. The moment comes in a lot of people's lives, not just mine, when suddenly your employer says, by the way, you're done. We're done. We've been sold to another company and they don't want you around. You make too much money. Go away. I was sure I was going to get hired by somebody else. Guaranteed. After about 7 months, 8 months of looking for work and not getting hired, my whole self-concept crumbled. Mm. Not very ego-boosting to tell the story, but I'll finish it quickly. I stopped sleeping. I stopped taking care of my body. I stopped taking care of everything. And I was fully falling apart. I had great health insurance, so I had lots of really expensive doctors. And the aggregate view was that I was dying and I needed to do something, but they didn't have a pill for me or a piece of surgery. And then I sat in front of the computer, then heard the sound of Swami Satchidananda chanting Om and Hari Om. And I wound up coming home. All I can think of is that this may sound a bit woo-woo, but perhaps during my whole 1 hour of face-to-face with him for that interview, which became the primetime special, he must have somehow put an emergency beacon inside of me so that if I was ever in really bad trouble, I would think to call Yogaville.
An emergency beacon. I like that. So was what happened there an issue of identity? Would you say that your identity, your self-worth was wrapped up very intimately with your career, and when that fell away, some sort of depression happened as a result?
That's a really good description. I mean, Avi, look, how many of these podcasts have you done?
We're about at 100 now. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Now, just imagine, I had done probably 5,000 or 6,000 on-camera appearances over my career. So much of my identity was wrapped up in the notion that I was Jeff Kamen, news anchor, Jeff Kamen, correspondent, Jeff Kamen, producer, Jeff Kamen, something else instead of just me. So when all of that came crumbling down and was not being rebuilt, it took me down with it. Now, that's nobody's fault but mine.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if you need to take the responsibility for that, because to me it seems like a cultural issue. You know, it's not just you, right? And I'm sure that you're witnessing. I'm sure you're witnessing. You know, this happened for people all the time, right? Like, whatever our name is, this, you know, and I'm wondering if that's really what the yoga is about, is allowing that to fall away if you can.
Right. And shortly after I arrived at the ashram, all broken, within a couple of days, I was invited to participate in an orientation conversation, a briefing for visitors, guests, because that's all I was. And there were about, I guess, 7 or 8 of us in the room. They sat us down. Brilliant, lovely woman named Sita Rose did the whole presentation. And she said, now I'd like to play a short video for you. And about halfway through the interview, I came mostly awake. And then it was all over, and she thanked everybody. And I just sat there, and she said, sir, did you have any additional questions? And I said, would you play the video back one more time? And she said, sure, why? And when she got to a chunk of it, she said, wait a minute. And she stopped it. Isn't that your voice? I said, yeah. You guys made a small mistake. It says from CBS documentary. It's a single error. It's from a PBS documentary. That's mine. And of course, she lit up, because this was not just some broken stranger. This was a broken stranger with a long-time connection to the guru and his work. And in short order, relatively speaking, not only did the ashram restore me to health, but it let me go back to work. Doing one of the things that I love to do, which is to tell stories about yoga. And I made a bunch of documentaries about yoga, great yoga teachers, how Yogaville works, what it's like to come here. And it's part of my gratitude practice. Every time I reach for the camera, it's about gratitude. How could I not be endlessly grateful for being handed, at least so far, an additional decade of life?
It's interesting. You know, I think maybe a typical viewpoint would look at your career, the length of your life, and all the things that you've done, you know, to name a few, you know, time with Martin Luther King Jr., the Dalai Lama. You've won an Emmy. You were one of the founders of All Things Considered, you know, very influential in the civil rights movement, all these things, you know, and then you found yoga, you know, and your way to Yogaville. And that's what I hear you expressing the most amount of gratitude for. I mean, maybe it's the whole thing. I'm sure it's the whole thing.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But only being in Yogaville gave me the perspective through meditation, through contemplation, through my more than 1,000 walks on the Lotus Road here. Did I have an opportunity to really see the very wide angle view of this privileged life that I've led? I mean, for goodness sake, just imagine you walk into a room and you see somebody who seems to be strangling the U.S. senator whose office is there. And then while you're making pictures, you realize it's not somebody strangling, it's the senator being given a blessing scarf by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In those days, you only had 36 exposures of film, and when the camera was empty, it went ding. By that time, His Holiness had grabbed Senator Patrick Leahy, a very large guy, and gently placed him into an armchair, because being that close to His Holiness can really bliss you out if you're open to it. And then he turned toward me, ran toward me, grabbed me by both ears, shook me like a toy, put his nose against mine, and went, "Ha!" Then he left. And I found the chair next to Senator Leahy, lowered myself into it. And Senator Patrick Leahy, who's got a voice like this, big guy, turns to me and he says, "Oh, Jeff, you're here too." Yeah. So those things happened in my life. And crazy things. There was a helicopter that was hijacked. No awful details. And I got there with my camera crew just as the first unit of police were coming in, and the cops raced into this elevator right behind us. And as we're racing up to the roof of the Pan Am building, which isn't there anymore, in Manhattan, as the helicopter's coming in, and I say to the highest ranking of the cops, who's a kid younger than me, I grabbed him by the arm and I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "What do you mean, how am I doing? I'm the guy responsible for response to this. What am I going to do?" And I grabbed him, both hands on the shoulder, and I said, "Fear not, the Lord is with you." I had no idea what to do. It just filled me. And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah." The door's open, and he yells to the other cops with him, "Follow me." He runs to the helicopter, dives in, grabs the hijacker of the helicopter, throws the guy on the ground, handcuffs him. And after all this is done, and other cops take this crazy guy away, he says to me, "Who the hell are you?" And I said, "Well, look at the microphone. It says WC, the station I'm working for." He said, No, man. Who are you?" And I just laughed and I said, "I have no idea." But yoga answered the question.
What is the answer?
I'm present. I'm right here, right now. I've always been an intervener all my life. I get in the way. 2 years ago, I was visiting one of my kids in D.C. on the D.C. Metro. And I see at the other end of the car, which is not very much filled up with people, only got 20 people in the car, I see a fight about to take place between two people, different races, different genders, both very large people. And I can feel blows are about to come. And I bellow from the other end of the car, "Stop it now." Where did that come from? I have no idea. And they stopped. Then the train made a stop, and one of them stepped off. And all that terrifying energy left the car. And I got off two stops later and went on my way. But those kinds of things have happened to me in my life over and over again. I have no idea why. But I know one thing. I'm here.
In a way, it seems that this is kind of the opposite of what you were speaking about before in terms of, the depression that you went through when you lost your job.
Sure.
and all of that, taking my persona, my identity very, very seriously. And on the other side of that is being a conduit and realizing that something else is good. And really around loneliness, I think too, right? What I've experienced is, the most challenging aspect in life is when I feel alone, separate, different.
Sure.
But, the moments that you've described, the moment with that police officer of, fear not, the Lord is with you, right? And he felt the truth of it, and you felt the truth of it because it came through you. And is that what yoga is about? Is feeling that the truth of it is that we're not alone, that there's something else inside of us that is divine?
No question. Don't tell anyone else, though. Just between you and me. Here's another one. 1966. Dr. King is in Mississippi leading a huge march. I'm down there covering it by myself. Everybody else is down there with teams of reporters. I'm down there by myself. So I would, on a number of occasions, get lost. I have to go find the march after grabbing a bite to eat somewhere. And I think I can see the march off in the distance somewhere. It's something. So it all looks like a big park to me. See, I'm such a city guy. It didn't occur to me that wasn't a park. It's a farm. So I start wending my way with my tape recorder in my hand over this parkland, which is farmland. And I make a turn, and there's this small farmhouse. By local standards, maybe not a farm, not very small. And what I see just blows my mind. There's this really old, God must have been 40, because I was 22, and all those people look old to me. Now that I'm almost 80, it's almost astonishing to look back at it. And this old white guy's got a gun in his hand, 5-inch barrel, 38 caliber revolver, and he's pointing it, and I'm following the direction of the gun. And there are these two young African-American men. They're wearing what's called the Civil Rights Movement uniform. Chino pants, white business shirt, folded up to the elbow. Those were Dr. King's guys. Most of these were divinity students, college students, smart, capable people with astonishing courage. And they're standing there. Each of them is holding 2 metal buckets. And I'm hearing him say ugly things at these young men. And one of them is saying, "Sir, we were looking for the owner. We wanted to buy water so we could bring them over to the people in the march who are really urgently needing water." And he is mumbling something, and I'm coming into his field of view. And I know that that's a dangerous moment with somebody with a gun in their hand who may be frightened. And I thought, he's probably scared out of his mind. And forgive me, I did a terribly fake Southern accent, but it was good enough at the moment. I said, "Sir, can I help you?" And he turned to me. He said, I want these, and I won't use the word he used, off my property. And I said, "How would it be if I walked them right off now?" And he said, "I'd be most appreciative of that." So I walk over to the civil rights workers and I say, "You two, follow me off the property." We get out of the guy's point of view. You can't see. We've made a turn on the highway where the march is, and we embrace because we had just avoided death, or who knows, maybe all 3 of us, and terrible trauma for that old man. Why did I do that? I have no idea. I didn't think it through. There was not a moment of evaluation. It was another moment when I became a conduit for higher energy. And I'm so grateful for those moments.
It seems like there's a theme here in terms of the life raft is sent to you in the moments when you are the most desperate. You don't know what to do. Like the logical mind maybe doesn't know what to do. And naturally, you open up to an answer that seemingly wasn't there.
I like that. But I think it's so much quicker than that. It's not as though I thought, "Oh, what do I do?" There wasn't even that. There was, "Here's the program and you're doing it." I don't know where this stuff comes from. I mean, there have been other moments like that. Just astonishing. Yes, I'm in the middle of writing my memoir. It should only be half as good as your book.
Okay, so I'm curious about our pasts, and especially, someone who has as rich of a past as you do. What do you feel is a healthy relationship with our pasts?
You're saying PATH, right? Or PASS, PAST. What are you saying?
PAST.
Oh.
Yeah, our pasts.
Oh. What's a healthy relationship? Well, for me, it's gratitude. Gratitude is the divine sorter for me. Whatever else is going on, no matter what I'm going through, if I have the benefit of having a moment of clarity, I return to gratitude. My wife and I have this deal. I married a really, you know her, really wise, deep, profound, the exact opposite of me, human being. And when I'm off, when I'm somehow drawn back to pre-Yogaville neurosis, all she has to say to me is, "Hey, do mantra." And I stop whatever I'm doing. And Om Hrim Namah Shivaya. Never takes more than 5 or 6 recitations for me to become centered again. What a gift that is.
Right. I'm also wondering, it seems that it's possible to kind of get trapped in the past. When I spend time, I'm actually going through my own journal, my old journals, that started at the end of elementary school for me. And there's all these things that I don't even remember happening, and I get the sense, and even probably I haven't read them until now, because I don't think I was able to not get trapped again in like my identity, the things that have happened. But now maybe it's just giving me some perspective. But that's what I'm wondering about is, like you said, can I have gratitude for all the variety of experiences that I have been through, but at the same time, not lose the opportunity of being right here, right now?
Oh, no, exactly right. Forgive me. Oh, no, right now, exactly right sounds like the most astonishing twist around. Let me rephrase. I concur. I have that experience myself. And my guess is that anybody who meditates for more than 60 seconds a day has access to that knowledge. For me, the past has never been a trap, except when everything that I was doing in my life that had been supportive of the best of me, I thought at the time, crumbled. Could that happen to me again? I guess. But one of the advantages of being this freaking old is that I have a couple of nice small pensions, and the stress to make a living isn't in there. And I no longer feel quite so pressed to impress others with my identity. And we'll be right back after these messages, Avi. I don't need to do that. Don't. Not so much.
Speaking of the past, I'm wondering, how did you get into journaling to begin with?
No, never journaling.
Journalism, sorry. Yeah, because I just was talking about journaling. Anyway.
No, but journaling, the difference, of course, is huge. In journaling, we're exploring ourselves. I was interested in the outside world. I didn't even think that there was anything remotely interesting inside of me. That took a long time. So I discovered I was the most fascinating subject on earth. Oh, God. Did I say that? I'm the son of an engineer author who was stricken by polio, which disabled him from the waist down for the rest of his life when he was 33 and I was 8. It took him a year to be well enough to move from the hospital in Chicago back home to New York. And when he did that, I was assigned the job of walking behind him while he was working in his braces and crutches, so that should he fall backward, I could stop that so that he would not strike his skull and die. Ever since that moment, I have felt responsible for everybody. I'm only realizing that this year. Astonishing sense of feeling responsible for everything, about everything. Now, the fact that has not made me completely insane is a tribute to yoga, because I only discovered that consciously while I was here. But it's very shaping. It's very formative to be a 9-year-old, to be given that assignment. And then when you leave the space of the home and you go out in the rest of the world, and everybody who seems remotely disabled, you think there's your responsibility. It can make you quite other-centered rather than oneself. So I didn't understand that a whole chunk of me was looking within for a long time, until finally the fog got scraped out. Oh, wait a minute. Fog being scraped off. What is that? Oh, right. The guru. Right. So, I was introduced to yoga in 1972 by my first wife. We were together for 18 years, but she quickly was reading the Tibetan Book of the Liberation, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and got it. And I thought she was nuts. She was not the crazy one. It was me. Everybody called her Angel because that was her nature. And they called me if they wanted the story covered.
So you're saying your relationship with your father led you into journalism?
Yes, it absolutely did. Because by the time I was 12, I was editing his books. And it turned out that I had a voice that was somehow okay for radio. By the time I was 16, I was on the air on small radio stations in New York State every now and then. And by the time I was 18, it was more. By the time I was 19, I was a correspondent for Radio Press International in New York and at the United Nations. I was still penciling in my mustache.
But you remember what how did you come to be on the radio to begin with? Was it an inspiration, something that you heard?
All of that. I mean, I grew up in the era of Edward R. Murrow. And for the audience that doesn't know the name, it's worth the time on Google. Edward R. Murrow, Murrow. You won't regret the time you spend on it. But he essentially invented American broadcast journalism. A man of astonishing genius, courage, dignity, and with fabulous pipes. When that guy spoke, people listened. And in my family, when Mr. Morrow was on the radio, everybody was silenced. I wanted to be one of those guys. But when he had something to say, people silenced themselves or others. I loved that. I used to finish my anchoring at Channel 11 in New York on Saturday night and Sunday night, get out of my suit, get the makeup off, put on a torn leather jacket, a T-shirt, and sunglasses, and go out in the street. And before you get to Grand Central Station to go home to Connecticut, I would be nailed by 3 or 4 people who wanted to talk about stories that they'd seen me do 2 days before, a month before, 6 months before. I liked having that sense of importance in people's lives, and I felt terribly responsible about it. I still do.
You still feel that responsibility?
Sure, just as I know you do. When you know that when you push the button to record your podcast, you have an obligation to whoever is watching it or listening to it. You take it seriously. You have fun, but you always know that you've been invited inside of people's heads, and that comes with responsibility.
Yeah. I wonder what is right relationship with service. I mean, I think that's what we're talking about a little bit. You experienced that in a very serious way in an early age, and almost, I mean, is it an addiction even to consider service or responsibility in that way? It's pretty strong, right? I don't know if that's the appropriate word, but
addiction is so full of wretched negative.
Yeah. What's a better word?
How about it's filled with rewards?
Incentives,
yeah, that are healthy. That are healthy. The whole notion of service, I mean, it's like grace itself. When you really enter grace as service, and service is grace, it fills you with light. It fills you with gratitude. At least that's my experience. One of the jobs I've loved the most at the ashram is being the front desk receptionist. The first contact with strangers or guests who, have a reservation, and they come in, and who do they encounter but you? Well, what are you going to do? What's the energy you're going to offer? If you're conscious and careful and focused about being present, you want that moment to be memorable for them because you're representing the entire institution. It may only last 10 seconds, or it could be minutes, depending on what they need to know and if they need guidance. But for me, in many senses, I didn't talk about it just now, Avi. It took me back to the sense of responsibility for when somebody threw a cue to me and I was live on the air to millions of people. It's the same. It's one person, or it's a million people. It's about making a connection to other humans. That's the thing I crave most in my life, connectivity. I love it. And yoga gives me a shot to max that out.
But you were alluding before to maybe a dark side to this, to the responsibility, to the service.
To the child, yeah. Oh, sure. That's a tough one.
Taking on too much.
Yeah, but then again, you think about refugees and, 6-year-olds being in charge of the whole family because mom and dad have just been killed, and there's a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old. And that 6-year-old takes care of the other kids. So compared to that, what did I go through? Nothing. It was big in my life, but so what? Move on. Be present in now. And, that's also grace. When we understand that we can actually breathe in, focus, move forward, and enjoy being fully present. All kinds of gifts, they just come to us when we're fully present. Before this podcast interview with you, I was at the local supermarket at Food Lion, and I witnessed one kindness after another across racial lines, completely destroying all the worst fears that a lot of people have about how things are going in America today. At least where I was at this supermarket in Central Virginia, which is frankly, it's a place that is politically so red that I think that if the Republicans were to nominate a rabid golden retriever, it would win over the Democrat, no matter whoever that was. Nevertheless, day-to-day kindness, fun, people singing songs at each other for laughs. It looked almost as though a feature film was being made about how kind people can be to each other day to day, absent drama, absent people meticulously driving them against one another. It was a sweet, sweet experience.
Curious, what's your take on the state of the media and the emphasis that it tends to give, right, on not focusing on the things that you're just talking about, on all the kindness day to day, the progression that's happening, right? The majority of the media seems to be fairly negative. Is that okay, or do you see an issue with that?
It's always bothered me that my most memorable reporting, according to most people anyway, was about the worst calamities. But let's not forget that we are creatures, not just the fact that we're all made of stardust, the same stardust, but we are also descendants of early humans who, if they were not acutely attuned to negatives, they'd be killed in the moment. That sound in the brush, what is that? Oh, I think I'll just ignore it, and then you're eaten by an animal. Or somebody else who wants what you have in your cave will come behind you and kill you. So you had to be genetically attuned to the negative. That's still in us. Let's face it, the Earth is roughly 3 billion years old. Since it's cooled, and human beings have been around for what? A couple 100,000 years, maybe 500,000? We're still newbies. The planet is still new, relatively speaking. So we're still connected to those early humans in lots of ways. If there was a loud noise behind me right now, despite the fact that I'm on this with you, part of me would be wondering what that might be. Even though you and I live in Yogaville, in a place of breathtakingly sweet absence of menace, I would still wonder what that was. What was that sound?
Sure. Of course there's reasons. No question.
But let me ask you, let me respond to your question about how media plays things. So the point I want to make, forgive my being too circulating here around the central notion. Long before there was this nightmare on the internet of a science that allowed people's fears to be meticulously managed and amplified because it was good for business.
Yeah.
Long before we had that, we had the tabloid newspapers. So by the time television news came along, the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads, was an accurate description, at least of local news. It's what people wanted to hear about and see about. Only recently, in the last, I'd say, 20 years, has the notion of positive news been central in a lot of different markets. Do you know, by the way, that you can click on a weekly BBC radio program, which is called Positive, and all the good stuff that's happening around the world. And it's inspiring because in my experience as a journalist, in some of the worst places, in some of the ugliest moments, most people I've met have been kind, decent, even compassionate to this stranger walking into their space while they're having one of the worst moments in their lives. Their automatic, natural kindness embraced me. And that's what I wind up all the time here with our neighbors in Central Virginia. Grace, joy, beauty, kindness. My own hunch is that spending some time every day in meditation, consciously grateful for whatever comes my way, has amplified my capacity to receive love and maybe to give it, but who knows?
Yeah. It does seem that there's this, maybe for lack of a better word, inner battle between different, focuses of awareness. Where do I put my attention? And, I think about that line, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, does it have to be that way? Especially in relation to business. Okay. These businesses, they're interested in capturing people's attention and making money. Like that's their goal. And they've come to this conclusion that people are going to be more engaged, hooked by the negative. But I wonder if that's true. And I think about, what you're saying, and you've reminded me, one of my favorite memories that I have with my mother is that when I was probably only 7 or 8, she read to me this book called Random Acts of Kindness. And even at such a young age, I was so into it, right? It was so interesting. That hooked me, hearing these stories about strangers doing amazing things for each other.
I have kids who do that all the time. That's their orientation. That's their orientation. The schools where they went did a lot of that. My oldest kid is a brilliant singer-songwriter, yogi, whose conscious, caring kindness is almost overwhelming. And she found some of that in her mother, who, as I said, her nickname was Angel for a reason. And then she amplified it because she met great teachers who also offered love, kindness, without asking for anything in exchange. That's what she does. I'm so proud of those kids.
Yeah, I hear you talk about them a lot, and I can feel it. And they're inspiring you, right?
Every day.
Someone who might be interested in, taking a journey on the yoga path, or deepening their practice. Any recommendations, advice you would have for someone who wants to explore yoga further?
I have distilled it all down into my own brilliance. Here it comes. Humility, kindness, service, laughter, patience, and never, ever give up your own personal power. Enhance it, illuminate it. Being in the presence of great teachers, what a blessing. But know that it's on you to pilot your own journey, navigate your own way. It's wonderful to do that. And you'll pick up so many great brothers and sisters along the way, because those of us who are consciously on the path of yoga or Buddhism or you name it, genuine spiritual journeys, we have so much in common. It doesn't matter what we look like. It doesn't matter what our gender is. We understand that what it's about is here. And taking this and illuminating that and acting on that. So much for my 27 cents worth of wisdom, which is 1/4 of 108.
You really have distilled it down. You're ready for that one.
Absolutely not. This is because I'm paying attention to you and drawing on your loving energy, which sets me free in this space.
But that's what you're talking about. That's community. That's connection. We feed off of each other. It's amazing. I'm really glad that you brought up one word, because I have spoken to you about this before, and I want to speak to you about that now, and that is humility. And you've also given me a great gift in making me aware, presencing me to the trap of false humility and the difference between false humility and genuine humility.
Yeah, you're going to meet a lot of people in your life, we all do, who do this, and what they're really thinking is, what do I do now? Or how do I get what that guy's got? Or I hope this will get me in. And arriving at the genuine stuff takes time for a lot of people, and that's all right. That's where patience comes in. There's this sweet notion of fake it till you make it. That's fine. That's fine. But at some point you can look back and say, oh, I've arrived. I can stop faking it. I also have this maybe a strange view of realization. I think a lot of us are already there, but we've so idealized it. It's got to be out there somewhere. No, it's in here. It's connection. It's caring. It's compassion. And the stillness. Yeah. There's the glue.
Can you describe the genuine humility a little bit more? What is that? And why is it so important?
Genuine humility allows us to see ourselves clarity and is a pathway to so much of the good stuff that we all crave, the connection, the empathy, as opposed to the fake stuff, which is supposed to be helping us toward that anyway, but it's like the thin candy shell around the chocolate. It's going to melt, not in your hand, but in your head. So don't rush it. Let it come naturally. Folding your hands and bending your head doesn't necessarily mean you're humble. It may just mean you're looking for a modus vivendi. Diplomats like Latin, it means a way of getting through the moment. And that's all right. But be patient and be compassionate to yourself. It's the toughest one. The culture demands that we learn how to be empathetic toward others, but almost gives us no teaching about pointing that instrument inside us. If we have compassion for ourselves, it makes the real thing toward others so much more reasonable to do, more rapidly deployed when needed, because it comes from the natural space. Is that answering your question, or have I run around the block with it?
Yeah, I mean, the compassion, too, is strong inside of me right now, realizing the importance. I'm wondering, is that something that you feel you've made progress on yourself, your ability to show yourself compassion?
You and I share a number of teachers. One of them took me aside about 7 years ago, and he said, listen, don't do this false humble stuff. It disturbs everybody around you and you, so watch it. And I almost resisted until I realized, no, the guy's onto something. I better check myself out. It's a huge help. I'd utter his name, but he'd be embarrassed, so I won't. Because he's genuinely humble.
It seems like there's two important factors happening simultaneously. One is just an overwhelming gratitude for this experience of being alive and what a gift it is, and holding that in one hand. And in the other hand, also acknowledging that this life stuff is really challenging in many
Yeah. I'm not suggesting for a second that being consciously grateful is an easy thing for people who are having to pursue a job, a family, difficult relationships, and issues of self-concept, which is a very common set of experiences. I always thought that the notion of calling retirement the golden years was a lot of marketing, but I would argue that for me, my retirement, such as it is, I'm still writing and making documentary films and photographing, but having to chase a buck, not having to do that, thank you, God. And after my union and Social Security, thank you.
Yeah. And all those years of having to chase that and feel that pressure, right? That's a gift too, because it allows you to appreciate it now, which is the greatest thing, to value the freedom that you're experiencing presently.
No question about it. The day-to-day stuff, especially people in their 20s and 30s who are young family people, and I don't care what the family's like, whether it's straight or gay, it doesn't matter. All those pressures to create and maintain something that's beautiful and satisfying and even admired by others. That's tough. That's tough. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would insert an instantaneous empathy drive in everybody. And if that were really active, Avi, you would have a dramatic diminishment in the number of acts of violence around the world. It would probably drop by about, 95%. When I was a young reporter in Chicago, I received a phone call from the warden of Cook County Jail, which was a terrible place. And he said, leave your tape recorder in the car. This is off the record stuff. Jack Johnson's been gone for a long time, so it's okay to tell the story. He said, I've been listening to you on the radio. I think you're trying hard, but I don't think you know much about some things. And I said, I'm 22 years old. How could I know much about anything? He then took me on a personal tour through the prison. I couldn't wait to get out. It was terrifying. People reaching through their bars wanting to just grab me. And he took me back into his office. He said, so how are you? And I said, I'm shaking like a leaf. He said, good, it proves you're alive and human. Now let me tell you something. I just took you down murderers row. All of those guys are here because they killed somebody. If I could go back in their past and somehow magically erase the physical and emotional abuse that was done to them when they were little kids, I'd have empty prison. Think about that as you go out and cover the street and get out. That was a radical point of view back then. Nobody's born a criminal, or if they are, they're probably such a tiny percentage. It's statistically insignificant, except for those poor people who encounter them. We're malleable. We're children of clay. Who molds us? How? In what direction? My poor mom wanted a little girl. She had 10 miscarriages in me. When my dad got home from his job installing radar and sonar on U.S. Navy ships in the middle of World War II, I was a baby in a basket, and he found his wonderful young wife happily folding beautiful little garments. And he said, what are they? She said, oh, I bought them for the baby. Aren't they beautiful? He said, they look like dresses. She said, well, they are. And he said, are they dresses for boy babies? And she said, well, no. But I thought, he looks so cute in them. And keep in mind, this is a much less enlightened time about gender. And my dad said, please pick them all up and come with me. And he took her out of the apartment to the incinerator and had her throw them all down the incinerator. He said to her, let's understand something. You wanted a little girl. I know. You got a man-child. Keep it straight. And by the time I was 17, my mother had done her best to convince me that I was fragile and frail. And I had to be fearful of everything all the time. And as fast as I could, I got out of there. Got a job, began living my own life, and pursued every opportunity to find living models of a totally different kind of maleness. And they were rescue workers and cops and firefighters who daily, routinely offered their own lives in the defense of others or to rescue others. And that was the kind of spiritual core that I wanted for myself. Though I wouldn't have identified that as a spiritual core, but it is. It is. You know, Swami Satchidananda, before he came to the United States, trained several different cadres of elite Indian police officers in yoga. Because as he said to me in the documentary film, he said a police officer should be a saintly fellow because of all the stressors that will come at him in a moment's notice. And if he has a conscious inner life, that will guide him in those worst times. It's a paraphrase, but that's what his message was. And all that clicked together with my teenage understanding, intuitive understanding of my identification with rescuers. And who knew that I spend the rest of my life, from time to time, emulating that role.
Thank you so much.
It's been a blessing to be with you, Avi.
It always is. I'm going to miss you when you're gone. I really am.
Be seeing you many times. Catch you Saturday.
All right.